Okay, so I live in the northern. I live in northern Connecticut, so I live in a tiny town called Winsted, and not much goes on here. It's a town with basically one main street and a lake called Highland Lake. There used to be a bunch of factories and stuff. It was a big factory town, and that river, the river that runs through the town, flooded the town, destroyed all the factories, and they're still basically abandoned to this day. So yeah, it's a very small town, not a lot goes on. Right, it's basically the start of the Berkshires, very close to the Massachusetts border, and yeah, that's Winsted, land of laurels. So, as a kid, I stumbled upon horror movies and this show called Lost Tapes. I think it was on Discovery Channel, right? And it was basically a found footage horror show about cryptids, and I became obsessed with cryptids, cryptozoology, aliens, ghosts, goblins, ghouls, whatever. And little did I know, my town of Winsted had its own cryptid. So today, I'm going to be telling the story of Winsted's very own cryptid, the Winsted Wildman. So, I didn't initially know about this story, to be quite honest. One night I was partying on the lake with my friends, and my good friend Brenna, who's been in my videos before, told me about this alleged wild man that lives in the woods, and her take on it is very different than what the legend actually kind of is, but she claims that there's this wild man who lives in the woods and he's basically a serial killer. Quite the frightening tale. But I thought she was just making something up to spook little old drunk me, you know. Flash forward about 3 years, we're in Austin, Texas at the Museum of Weird. And they have this little map, and it's a map of, I think it's Canada, US, and Mexico, like North America, and all the cryptid sightings and where you can find them. And I'm looking at like what's around in Austin, what's in New York, where we're from, and then I'd look at Winsted, and lo and behold, the Winsted Wildman is on this fucking map. So I lose my shit because I didn't know it was a real fucking phenomena, and Brenna's like, I told you. So then I got to do my research, and now I can tell you the true story of the Winsted Wildman. Alright, so our story begins with a man named Riley Smith in, August of 1895. He's out about town and he's walking his dog, and suddenly this naked, hairy man, about, I think like 8 feet tall, they say, or something like that, jumps out of the bushes and like scares the shit out of Arthur, paralyzes the dog in fear, and just runs about for a little bit, and he's gone. Now, as soon as Arthur reports this sighting, there are multiple other sightings of this wild man, this wild hairy creature that is very agile, moves a little bit weird, and disappears before you can even process what you just saw. So there are a handful of other sightings that match what Riley is saying. His experiences are published in the Winsted Herald. But after these little mini sightings, after his major one, everyone kind of forgets about it. He's never seen again. What people do suspect, though, is that it could have been Arthur Bedwick, who escaped a Litchfield mental institution and could have just been on the loose causing all this ruckus, right? It's very Halloween. It's very Michael Myers-esque. I can understand now where Brenna kind of got the story of a serial killer on the loose when you have a mental patient break out of an asylum and start terrorizing a town. But the descriptions of this naked man who's covered head to toe in hair rings a little bit of a cryptid bell, and you're like, oh, that's Bigfoot. That's Bigfoot. So apparently Bigfoot has been sighted in Connecticut or New England a handful of times. The narrative quickly changed from it being this crazy man terrorizing the town to it's a species, it's Bigfoot, it's whatever, it's a species of Sasquatch that was sighted here in Winsted. What? I'm a liar and a fraud. I'm sorry. I'm rereading Riley Smith's description. He was not 8 feet tall. He was only 6 feet. So the Winsted Wildman is kind of a short Sasquatch, but the actual quote is, "A wild, hairy man of the woods, 6 feet in height. The man's hair was black and hung down long on his shoulders, and that his body was thickly covered with black hair. The man was remarkably agile, and to all appearance was a muscular, brawny man, a man against whom any ordinary man would stand little chance." Sounds like Riley had a little crush. What? Anyways, so literally that happened, and then everyone was like, oh, okay. And they just went back to doing their normal stuff because no one gives a shit about anything. You know, I mean, okay, someone escaped from an asylum. Okay, I still have to do a shift at the factory, so how does it concern me? Then the 1970s come along. 1972, published in the Hartford Courant, two young men on Winchester Road, near the Crystal Lake Reservoir, which I believe is that way from me. But anyways, it's a little outside of Winsted proper. They reported seeing a strange man-like creature. Oh, so, okay. This one, they reported seeing a strange man-like creature that was about 8 feet tall. So, you know what? I take it back. I'm not a liar. The wild man grew up to be 8 feet tall. Obviously, he was a baby in the 1800s, and then, you know, they live very long, and he just grew. So some people were like, "No, you saw a black bear," because the woods. I have woods behind my house. They're riddled with bears. Our garbage cans have to have bear protectors on them. The bears will walk right up on your deck and be like, "Food." So. No, we can tell the difference between what is and what isn't a bear. Also, a bear standing on its hind legs, is that going to be 8 feet tall? Is that going to appear to look like a man to you? Like, let's think this through seriously. A bear standing on two legs looks like a bear. Doesn't look like a man. So, they spotted the wild man. 8 decades later. I know. Crazy stuff. Has the wild man been seen again? Well, yes. In 1974, 2 years later, two couples who had been parked at night by Rug Brook Reservoir, I don't know where that is, they described to police being terrified by seeing a 6-foot, 300-pound creature covered with dark-colored hair. in the moonlight and had fled the area immediately. The police went back to search and were unable to find any tracks of evidence. Since then, there have been no other reports or accounts of the Winsted Wildman. That one, they definitely just saw a bear. Yeah, that was a bear. Now here's the tea. Brandon T. Biscaglia of the Hartford Skepticism Examiner needed some receipts. He suggested that the original report may have been fabricated to sell more of the Winsted Herald. In my opinion, a lot of people are seeing bears. Do I think that there could be crazy people living in these woods? Yeah, there's a lot of abandoned shit in the woods and stuff. Do I think, like, I don't think we have a Bigfoot around here. I would love it, though, if we did. I should probably go looking in the woods for, the Winsted Wildman. But apparently there was, like, Bigfoot was in, just like vampires became all the rage when Twilight came out, you know? In the 1970s, Bigfoot stories were at an apex. So people just wanted in on the action, you know?
Taxi!
So, this story doesn't seem to hold up much. You could say that an escaped mental patient was the original Wildman, but that man was found living in Cuba 6 months later after he escaped. So,
Taxi!
He was found 6 months later in Cuba living naked in the tropics and eating raw fruits and vegetables from the jungle. Where's his into the wild? So I guess he could have been the initial Wildman because he was a freak. This article here says Benjamin Thomas is Winstead's municipal historian. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. But he says that the locals basically fabricate the story over and over and over again, that it's just become more fiction than fact at this point. I.e., Brenna's story of i.e. Brenna's story of a serial killer living in the mountains. Okay. Something happened in 1985, Thomas said, but townspeople talked about it and added to it over the years. There's a quote from one local here. Nope, never seen nothing like that up here. We have some pretty wild looking people in Winsted, but no wild man. Drag them, Paul Rego. Oh, this is funny too. So apparently there is an official Bigfoot sighting in the area in Litchfield in 1968, 73 years after the Winsted Wildman was spotted. And I guess someone goes, maybe that was the Winsted Wildman's grandson. Wow. Okay. So people just took this story that was made to sell newspapers and blew it up because everyone wants like a little town legend, you know. I'm originally from Long Island. We have the Amityville Horror House. We should have been more creative and like been like, there's a monster living in Highland Lake, or there's goblins in the woods. Oh. We do have Green Lady Cemetery, which apparently is a cemetery that's haunted by a green apparition who appears in the form of a lady. I will be going there for a video in the future. Scoping the scene, as they say. But Winsted Wildman, sightings are so far and few that, you know, I'm not going to be going in the woods looking for him, especially when there are actual threats of being mauled by a bear. That man's read on the entire town of Winsted is going to stay in my head forever. But there is something scary about the woods for sure, and I think people, I mean, I spent a lot of my childhood walking in the woods back there. You hear things. rustling in leaves. It gets really dark at night here, and there's not a lot of streetlights. You don't know what you're seeing, and you don't know who's out there. If someone can escape from a Litchfield mental hospital and then just come running naked and somehow make it to Cuba, you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know your neighbors. There's a lot to be scared of everywhere. You never know what's lurking in your town. So I'll leave you guys with that. You don't know your neighbors. You don't know nature. Do you know yourself?
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 Do you know yourself? Do you know yourself?
Did you guys hear that?